once upon a time, in an age when gods walked the sands of Egypt, the world was ordered and green under the rule of King Osiris. He was the handsome god who taught humanity how to cultivate grain, how to worship the divine, and how to live in peace. His queen was his sister, the great goddess Isis, whose knowledge of magic was surpassed only by her devotion to her husband. Together, they brought prosperity to the two lands, and the people flourished under their reign. But not all was serene in the divine family. Osiris had a brother, Set, the god of the harsh desert, of chaos, and of violent storms. Where Osiris brought life, Set sowed disorder. His jealousy toward his brother was a poison that seeped into his every thought, a resentment that grew with every hymn the people sang for the Green King. Married to Set was the fourth sibling, the goddess Nephthys. She was a being of shadows and twilight, often standing in the brilliant glare of her sister Isis. Yet her heart was not filled with the same darkness that consumed her husband. Her marriage to Set was a tense and barren union, defined more by his brooding ambition than any affection. Nephthys watched her sister's life with a silent longing. She saw the love between Isis and Osiris, a bond that seemed to make the very crops grow stronger and the Nile flood more generously. She saw the beauty and power of Osiris, his gentle strength, a stark contrast to Set's brutal and unpredictable rage. A forbidden attraction grew within her, a dangerous pull toward her sister's husband, the king of all Egypt. She desired the peace and vitality that Osiris embodied, a world away from the sterile chaos of her own household. The desire festered, twisting into a desperate plan. Nephthys knew Osiris would never betray Isis willingly. His honor was as vast as the sky. If she were to have him, it would have to be through deception. She watched her sister's habits, learned the cadence of her voice, the scent of the lotus perfume she wore, and the way she moved through the halls of the palace, waiting for a night when a festival had left the court in a state of weary celebration. And perhaps when Isis was occupied with a distant ritual, Nephthys made her move. Drawing upon her divine power, she shrouded herself in an illusion, molding her own form into a perfect likeness of Isis. She was no longer Nephthys, the shadow. She was the radiant queen. She walked with Isis's grace, spoke with her voice, and wore her scent. She approached Osiris in the dim light of his chambers, and he, seeing his beloved wife, felt no reason to suspect anything. He believed he was in the arms of Isis, his one true partner. In his ignorance, he consorted with her sister, leaving behind a garland of sweet melilote flowers he had woven, a small, innocent token of affection that would later serve as undeniable proof of the secret union. From that forbidden embrace, a new life was conceived. As weeks turned into months, Nephthys felt the change within her. A quiet terror began to bloom alongside the child. She was pregnant with the son of Osiris. The child was a testament to her secret betrayal. Her fear was not of divine judgment or the shame of her actions. Her fear had one name: Set. She knew her husband's rage. It was a destructive force, like a sandstorm that strips the flesh from bone. He was already consumed with a festering jealousy for his brother's throne and success. If he were to discover that his own wife carried Osiris's child, his hatred would ignite into an inferno that would consume them all. He would not hesitate to destroy the child, and he would certainly turn his violence upon her. So Nephthys concealed her growing belly beneath heavy robes, her movements becoming more furtive, her face a mask of strained calm that hid a maelstrom of panic. Every shadow seemed to hold the watchful eyes of her husband, every whisper a condemnation. The day of the birth came with suffocating dread. She could not call for midwives or seek the comfort of her sister. She stole away to a hidden, desolate place, a forgotten corner of the sprawling palace grounds where no one would hear her cries. Alone, she endured the agony of childbirth, her only companions the silence of the night and the overwhelming fear of discovery. The child who was born was a boy, his skin dark and his eyes watchful, a son of the great Osiris. But he could not be a prince. He was a secret that could get them both killed. Clutching the newborn to her chest, Nephthys was torn. A powerful, primal love for the infant warred with the certainty of his doom if he remained with her. To protect him, she had to abandon him. Her heart shattered with the decision, but the vision of Set's fury was a far more terrifying reality. She wrapped the baby in plain linen cloths, a silent prayer on her lips. Under the cold light of the moon, she carried the small bundle to the wild, marshy banks of the Nile. Papyrus reeds grew thick and tall there, a dense thicket that offered concealment, but also harbored dangers. Jackals prowled the edges of the wilderness, their howls echoing in the night, and other predators lurked within the murky waters. It was a place of peril, a boundary between the safety of civilization and the untamed wild. With tears streaming down her face, Nephthys gently placed the sleeping infant into a basket made of woven papyrus, setting it afloat among the reeds where the water was shallow. She gave him one last look, memorizing the face of the son she could never claim, before turning her back and melting back into the shadows from whence she came. The baby was left alone, a helpless offering to fate, his faint cries lost in the rustling of the papyrus. Isis, of course, discovered the affair. The evidence was the garland of sweet melilote flowers, left carelessly in a chamber where it did not belong. The great magician, queen of Egypt and sister wife to Osiris, did not need to see the act to know the truth. The scent of the crushed clover, intertwined with her sister Nephthys' subtle aura, was an undeniable confession left in the silent air. A wave of betrayal might have washed over a lesser being, but Isis was not a lesser being. Her first thought was not of the infidelity, but of the consequence. She knew her sister's terror and her brother Set's volatile hatred. A union between Osiris and Nephthys, however brief and deceptive, could only result in a child born under a shadow of death. A deep disquiet settled over her. Her magic, usually a calm river flowing within, became a turbulent sea. she felt a life, new and fragile, flickering at the edge of existence, surrounded by peril. The vision was not clear, but the feeling was absolute. A child of Osiris was in grave danger, leaving the damning garland where it lay. Isis moved with a purpose that transcended personal hurt. This was no longer about a broken trust, but about protecting an innocent life from the chaos that was set. She did not seek out her husband to confront him, nor did she storm into Nephthys' chambers. Instead, she went to the kennels, where the royal hunting dogs rested. These were not ordinary animals, but creatures of keen instinct, their senses alive to the world in ways humans, and even many gods, could not comprehend. Isis projected her desperate need, her search for a small, lost thing, and the pack understood. With Isis at their lead, the dogs surged from the palace grounds toward the untamed wilderness bordering the Nile. They moved as one, a current of muscle and instinct, their noses to the ground. They led her away from the ordered fields and into the dense, chaotic marshlands, a labyrinth of towering papyrus and murky water. Isis followed, her robes soaked and muddy. Finally, the lead dog stopped and let out a soft bark. The others gathered around a small clearing in the reeds, their tails giving low, uncertain wags. There, nestled in a crude papyrus basket, was a baby. He was crying, a thin, desperate sound that was nearly swallowed by the vastness of the swamp. He was alone, helpless, and cold. Isis pushed through the final reeds and knelt. With infinite gentleness, she lifted the infant from the basket. He was small, but his eyes, when they opened, were dark and profoundly watchful. His skin was the color of the rich, black earth of the Nile Delta after the flood, the color of regeneration and life. Cradling the baby against her, she knew instantly what she must do. This child would not perish in the wilderness. She would claim him. She would raise him as her own. Returning to the palace, she did not hide her arrival. She walked directly to her own chambers, where Osiris was waiting, his brow furrowed with a worry he could not name. He saw the child in her arms, and confusion warred with awe on his face. Isis met his gaze, her expression clear and unyielding. There was no accusation in her eyes, only a statement of fact and a declaration of intent. "He will be our son," she said, her voice calm but resonant with power. She named him Inpu, a name signifying a royal child, though he would later become known to all as Anubis. Later, as if drawn by an invisible thread of fate, Nephthys appeared at the door to Isis's chambers. Her face was a ruin of grief and terror. She saw her son, alive and safe in her sister's arms, and collapsed, her silent anguish finally breaking into sobs. Isis did not turn her away. She gestured for her sister to enter. The two goddesses looked at the infant, the living proof of their shared and complicated bond. Nephthys, through her tears, tried to explain her fear, her panic, the certainty of Set's violence. Isis listened, her heart filled with a profound understanding of the darkness they both lived beside. In that moment, they were two two women bound by a shared bloodline and a common threat. He will never know, Nephthys swore, her hand trembling as she reached out to gently touch the baby's dark hair. She made an oath on the black earth and the life-giving flood of the Nile, the most sacred vows an Egyptian could make. Set would never learn the truth of the child's parentage. Anubis would be raised as the son of Isis and Osiris, shielded by the power of the throne and the fierce love of the two sisters who brought him into the world and saved him from it. Isis and Osiris raised the boy Anubis within the protective walls of their palace. The court knew him only as the adopted son of the king and queen, a quiet addition to the royal household. From his earliest days, Anubis was different. He was not a child of boisterous laughter or loud games. Instead, he possessed a profound stillness, an unnerving ability to be present in a room without anyone realizing he had entered. He learned to move with the silence of a passing shadow, his footsteps making no sound on the polished stone floors. He would appear at his mother's side as she studied her scrolls, and Isis, the most powerful magician in Egypt, would sometimes startle, having not sensed his approach. This innate quietness was a tool she chose to sharpen, not correct. Isis saw in him a unique nature, a spirit that dwelt on the edge of things. She took his education upon herself, teaching him the deeper secrets of the cosmos. In the hushed rooms of the temple, she taught him the art of Heka, the magic that bound the universe together. She showed him how sacred words, when spoken with the correct intonation, could command inanimate objects and persuade the spirits of the air. Anubis was a dedicated student, his focus absolute. He learned the hieroglyphs that held power, the spells of protection, and the rituals that opened pathways between worlds. He absorbed the knowledge patiently, his silent nature making him a perfect vessel for the gravest of secrets. Isis taught him that silence itself was a virtue, a form of power that allowed one to see and hear what was truly happening beneath the noise of the world. While Isis cultivated his connection to the unseen world, Osiris, his adoptive father, grounded him in the tangible one. Osiris, the king who had taught humanity to read the seasons and farm the land, taught Anubis to read the earth itself. They would walk for hours along the banks of the Nile and into the edges of the desert. Osiris showed him how to read the stories left in the sand. With a single glance, Anubis learned to tell the difference between the track of a fox and that of a wild dog, noting the subtle drag of a claw or the depth of the print. He learned to identify the faintest impressions left by snakes, scorpions, and beetles. His senses, already sharp, became preternaturally keen under Osiris's tutelage. He could smell the coming rain on a dry wind long before the clouds gathered. He could sense the presence of animals hiding in the brush without seeing them. Osiris taught him to be a watcher, a skill that came to Anubis as naturally as breathing. He learned to sit so still for so long that he became invisible even in the broad daylight. Animals would move past him without fear, and people would walk by his hiding place, completely unaware of the watchful eyes following their movements. He was always observing, learning the patterns of the world with an intensity that few could match. As he grew from a boy into a young man, these traits solidified into a distinct persona. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were precise and carried weight. In the royal court, he was an enigma. When he walked with his family, he instinctively fell into the position of a guardian, walking slightly ahead and to the left, his eyes scanning the surroundings, a silent protector for the king and queen. The priests and servants in the palace spoke of him in hushed, odd tones. They claimed his mere presence could make the stifling summer air feel cool, and that bothersome flies would inexplicably fall to the floor, soothed into stillness by his calm aura, while ANUBIS grew under the protection of the royal house. A venomous jealousy festered in the heart of Set. The god of the desert and chaos watched his brother Osiris rule Egypt, admired by gods and mortals alike for the prosperity and order he brought to the land. Every hymn sung in Osiris's honor, every successful harvest, and every new law that brought peace to the two lands was a fresh wound to Set's pride. His resentment hardened into a cold, calculated hatred. And from this hatred, a meticulous plan for murder was born. Set's scheme was one of cunning deception, designed to unfold in plain sight. He announced he would host a magnificent banquet for the gods and nobles of Egypt, a celebration of unrivaled splendor. In secret, he commissioned his finest craftsmen to construct an exquisite chest. It was made from rare woods, inlaid with ivory and precious metals, a masterpiece of artistry that would catch any eye. Its true purpose was hidden in its dimensions. Set had secretly obtained the exact measurements of his brother, and the chest was built to fit Osiris perfectly. The night of the banquet arrived, and the great hall of the palace was filled with music, food, and wine. Set played the generous host, his sinister intentions masked by a facade of revelry. As the feast reached its peak, he ordered the beautiful chest to be brought into the center of the hall. He announced to the assembled guests that this magnificent prize would be a gift to whomever it fit most perfectly. Intrigued by the game and the chest's beauty, the guests lined up to try their luck. One by one, they lay down inside the ornate box. A noble was too tall, his feet sticking out awkwardly. A priest was too broad, his shoulders pressing against the sides. A general was too short, rattling around inside. Each guest tried and failed, climbing out with laughter and shaking their heads. The chest seemed made for no one. Finally, Set turned to his brother. Osiris, charmed by the game and admiring the chest's craftsmanship, stepped forward. He lay down inside the coffin, and a murmur went through the crowd. It was a perfect fit. He filled it in every part, as if it had been made for him and him alone. The moment Osiris was settled, Set gave a sharp signal. His conspirators, 72 of them placed strategically among the guests, sprang into action. They lunged forward, slamming the heavy lid of the chest shut before Osiris could react. The sounds of celebration turned to shouts of confusion and alarm. The conspirators worked with brutal efficiency, hammering long nails to secure the lid, making it impossible to open. To complete their work, they poured molten lead into the seams, sealing the chest completely airtight. The richly decorated chest was now a tomb. Inside, Osiris was trapped in total darkness, his breath cut short. Set commanded his followers to carry the coffin away. They muscled through the stunned crowd, heaved the sealed box onto their shoulders, and hastened out of the palace into the night. They marched to the banks of the Nile, where they cast the heavy coffin into the dark, swirling waters. The river's current caught the chest, pulling it downstream and carrying the murdered king away from his kingdom. In the palace, a terrible silence fell, followed by a rising panic. As the hours passed and Osiris did not return, young Anubis felt a deep wrongness settle over him, a cold void where his father's presence used to be. The truth dawned on Isis, and a wail of pure agony tore from her, a sound of such profound grief that it echoed through every hall and corridor of the palace. Her husband was gone. With Osiris removed, Set wasted no time. He strode into the throne room, his expression one of triumphant malice, and declared himself the new king of Egypt. Isis, her heart a cold stone of grief, resolved to find her husband. Her search began immediately. Transforming herself into a great kite, a bird with keen eyes, she flew across the lands, her mournful cries echoing over the fields and marshes. She followed the path of the Nile, her gaze scanning the waters and the banks for any sign of the magnificent chest that held her husband's body. Her sister, Nephthys, consumed by guilt and sorrow, joined the search, her own grief a mirror of Isis's pain. Together, the two goddesses roamed Egypt, asking everyone they met if they had seen the ornate coffin. For a long time, no one had any information. Finally, a group of children playing by the river told Isis they had seen a chest floating down the river and out into the great green, the Mediterranean Sea. Guided by this information, Isis's desperate search took her beyond the borders of Egypt. The currents had carried the coffin far across the sea, eventually washing it ashore in the Phoenician city of Byblos. There, on the coast, a magnificent tamarisk or erica tree sprouted, growing at a miraculous rate around the chest, encasing the body of the god within its trunk. The king of Byblos, awed by the size and beauty of the tree, ordered it cut down and brought to his palace, where he had it fashioned into a grand pillar to support his roof. Unaware of the divine secret it held, Isis, led by divine whispers and the scent of her husband's decaying body, eventually arrived in Byblos. She disguised herself as an old woman and sat by the city's well, a place where the queen's handmaidens came to fetch water. She wove their hair into intricate braids, breathing a divine fragrance into their tresses. When the handmaidens returned to the palace, the queen was so enchanted by the scent that she summoned the mysterious old woman. Isis was brought before the queen, and and was made the nursemaid to the infant prince. Isis cared for the child, allowing him to suckle from her finger, and at night, placing him in the fires of the hearth to burn away his mortality and make him immortal. One night, the queen saw her son in the flames and screamed in terror, breaking the spell. Isis then revealed her true divine form. She explained her quest and told the king and queen that the central pillar of their palace held the body of her husband, the king of Egypt. The king, humbled and awestruck, had the pillar carefully taken down and cut open, releasing the coffin. Isis let out a cry of such sorrow upon seeing it that the king's younger child died of fright. She then claimed her husband's body, consecrated the tree trunk, and prepared to return to Egypt. She journeyed back with the sealed coffin, hiding it in the dense papyrus swamps of the Nile Delta, while she went to prepare for the proper funerary rites. Her victory, however, was short-lived. Set's malevolence was as boundless as the desert he ruled. One night, while hunting wild boar under the light of the full moon, Set stumbled upon the hidden chest. He recognized it instantly. A terrifying rage, far greater than his initial jealousy, consumed him. The fact that Isis had found Osiris and thwarted his plan to have the body lost forever drove him into a frenzy of pure hatred. He tore the lid from the coffin and dragged his brother's body out. With his bare hands and blade, he attacked the corpse, his rage giving him monstrous strength. He hacked and ripped the body of Osiris into 14 pieces. His goal was ultimate desecration. He wanted to scatter his brother so completely that no magic, not even Isis, could ever make him whole again. He took the pieces and began a grim journey across the entirety of Egypt. He scattered them far and wide, from the northern marshes of the Delta to the southern cataracts at Aswan. He threw one piece into the Nile, buried others in the desert sands, and left parts in different nomes or provinces of the kingdom, ensuring they were as separated as possible. When Isis returned to the hiding spot in the swamp, she found the coffin smashed open and empty. The ground was desecrated, and the air was thick with the evidence of Set's violation. The sight shattered her. Her initial grief for his death was now multiplied by the horror of his mutilation. It was an evil beyond comprehension. For a moment, utter despair overwhelmed her. But Isis's will was forged in magic and love. Her devastation gave way to a cold, hard determination. Osiris would be found. He would be made whole. She knew she could not do this alone. She sought out her adopted son, ANUBIS. Though still a youth, he possessed the gifts that were now needed more than ever. His training had prepared him for this moment. His connection to the liminal spaces, his ability to read the faintest tracks, and his preternaturally keen senses could detect what others could not. He was a natural tracker, a guardian in the making. Isis explained the horrific task that lay before them. ANUBIS, with his characteristic stillness, listened. His quiet demeanor concealed a fierce loyalty to the father who had taught him and the mother who had saved him. Together, the great magician young god of the threshold prepared for their long and sorrowful quest. They would walk the length and breadth of Egypt, from city to desert, from temple to tomb, to find every sacred piece of the murdered god and defy the chaos Set had unleashed upon the world. The great search began, and they journeyed through the contrasting landscapes of the kingdom. They waded through the dense papyrus swamps of the delta, their feet sinking into the mud, and they walked the sun-scorched sands of the eastern and western deserts, where the heat was a physical weight. Their quest took them to bustling cities, remote villages, ancient temples, and forgotten tombs. Anubis, though still young, was essential to the search. His senses, honed by both his divine nature and his training, operated on a level beyond ordinary perception. He could sense the lingering essence of the dead, a faint but distinct trail that was invisible to all others. His connection to the boundary between life and death acted as a compass, pulling him toward the scattered fragments of his father, where Isis's magic was a powerful tool for protection and overcoming obstacles. Anubis's gift was for tracking the untrackable. These, her heart heavy with guilt for her part in the tragedy's beginning, joined them in their agonizing task. The three of them formed a team united in a sacred purpose. They were a triad of mourning and resolve, their individual strengths combining into a formidable force against Set's chaos. Their journey was arduous, but they started finding the pieces. They found a piece of Osiris, half buried in a shallow grave in the desert, uncovered only when Anubis detected its presence beneath the shifting sands. They discovered another fragment, tangled in the roots of an ancient tree deep within a secluded oasis. They dredged parts from the murky bottom of the Nile and found others hidden away in the dark corners of sacred places, left there by Set in his profane journey across the land. In some versions of the tale, wherever they found a piece, Isis would create a wax replica and command the local priests to build a shrine and perform the proper rites, telling each that they held the true burial site of the king. A clever ruse to protect the real fragments from Set. The local people of Egypt, hearing of the goddess's sorrowful quest, offered what help they could. Fishermen reported strange finds in their nets, and farmers spoke of sacred relics unearthed in their fields. Moved by the unwavering dedication of the divine family, they aided the search, their loyalty to their murdered king stronger than their fear of the new tyrant, Set. They traveled relentlessly, their hope warring with their exhaustion. Slowly, piece by painful piece, they began to reclaim the body of Osiris. They found 13 of the 14 pieces that Set had scattered. They recovered his arms, his legs, his head, and his torso. Each discovery was a small victory, a moment of profound sorrow and relief. They carefully wrapped each recovered part, preserving it with the knowledge of herbs and magic that Isis possessed. Only one piece remained lost. The 14th part, the phallus of Osiris, had been thrown into the Nile with such force that it was immediately consumed by a fish. Some accounts say it was the Oxyrhynchus. a fish that became taboo to eat thereafter. This final, brutal insult from Set meant that Osiris could never be made physically whole again in the world of the living. The great search had yielded 13 victories, but this one irretrievable loss would change the nature of Osiris's destiny forever. With the 13 recovered pieces of Osiris laid out before them, Isis, Nephthys, and Anubis faced a task of unprecedented scale. The fragments of the murdered god were beginning to succumb to the natural process of decay. To restore Osiris, they had to first halt death's corruption, a feat no god or mortal had ever accomplished. This was a challenge that required more than just magic. It required the invention of an entirely new art. They worked within a sacred tent, a temporary temple consecrated for this holy and gruesome task, its linen walls shielding their work from the profane world and the ever-watchful eyes of Set. Anubis, with the quiet intensity that defined him, took the lead. The first step was purification. Anubis knew the flesh had to be cleansed of earthly contaminants and the lingering traces of Set's chaotic energy. He carefully washed each of the 13 fragments with sacred water, ritually purifying them for the work ahead. The greatest enemy was moisture, the agent of all decay. Isis spoke of how the hot desert sands could naturally preserve a body, drawing out all water and leaving behind a dry, lasting husk. Anubis understood that they needed to replicate this process, but faster and more completely. He began to experiment with various salts and minerals. It was then that he discovered the potent qualities of natron, a naturally occurring salt compound harvested from the dry lake beds of the desert. It was a blend of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, and it had a powerful desiccating effect. Taking a small piece of flesh, he packed it in a mound of the granular white salt. He watched as the natron began to draw the moisture out, darkening as it absorbed the fluids. The flesh grew firmer, drier, and the process of decay halted. He had found his primary tool, working with a methodical precision that would come to define his role as embalmer. Anubis began to treat the entire body. He and Nephthys laid the 13 pieces of Osiris on a sloped bed and covered them completely in a massive pile of dry natron, allowing the salt to slowly and thoroughly dehydrate the divine flesh. While the body was being desiccated, Isis turned her attention to the most grievous injury, the missing 14th piece. Since the phallus could not be recovered from the Nile, Osiris could never be made physically complete. Using her immense magical power, Isis wove a replacement from gold and wax, shaping it with her own hands and breathing a potent enchantment into it to make it a functional part of his form. This act of creation would allow Osiris to father his heir, Horus, and ensure the continuation of his line. The desiccation process took 40 days. After this period, Anubis and Nephthys removed the pieces from the natron. The body was now shrunken and leathery, but it was preserved. The flesh was free of moisture and inert. Anubis then washed the body again to remove all traces of the salt and prepared it for the next stage. The dried skin was brittle, so he anointed each piece with a mixture of fragrant oils and resins, including pine resin, which he had learned would make the skin supple again and provide a barrier against insects and the environment. Now came the moment of reassembly. ANUBIS worked like a master craftsman, fitting the 13 pieces of his father back together. He laid the limbs, the torso, and the head in their correct anatomical positions, his knowledge of form unerring. He then attached the magical replacement that Isis had fashioned. The body of Osiris, though scarred and incomplete, now had the semblance of a whole man. The final stage was the wrapping. Isis and Nephthys had spent the long days of the desiccation weaving hundreds of yards of fine linen bandages. ANUBIS took these linens and began to wrap his father's body. This was a painstaking, ritualistic process. He started with the individual fingers and toes, wrapping each one separately before moving to the hands, feet, arms, and legs. He placed sacred amulets, blessed by Isis, at specific points between the layers of linen to provide magical protection. With each layer of bandage he applied, he spoke the sacred words Isis had taught him, incantations of power and preservation that imbued the wrappings with divine energy. He wrapped the head, then the torso, binding the reattached limbs tightly to the body. He would become the lord of the mummy wrappings, and this was his first and most important work. The entire process of washing, anointing, and wrapping took 30 days, bringing the total time to the sacred number of 70 days, a period that would become the standard for all future embalments. Osiris was now the first mummy. He was wrapped securely from head to foot in pristine white linen, his shape restored, his flesh protected from the ravages of time and decay. Through his grief, his intense focus, and his divinely guided innovation, ANUBIS had defied Set. He had invented the sacred art of embalming, creating a method to bestow a form of permanence upon the dead, a method that would become his sacred duty and his eternal legacy. The work of ANUBIS was a masterpiece of a newly invented art, but it was an empty victory. The meticulous preservation had secured the physical vessel, but the spirit, the Ba of the murdered king, was absent, lost somewhere in the vast, silent darkness that follows death. Isis, Nephthys, and ANUBIS stood before the first mummy, knowing that the most difficult and dangerous part of their work was about to begin. To truly defy Set, they had to call the soul of Osiris back from the abyss and reunite it with his body. The final ritual fell to Isis, the great magician, she whose words could bend the laws of the cosmos. ANUBIS now took on the role of guardian of the right. His stillness was a formidable shield, his presence ensuring that no malevolent spirit or lingering trace of Set's chaotic energy could interfere with the delicate process. Nephthys stood beside her sister. Isis began by preparing the space. She drew potent hieroglyphs on the ground around the bier, symbols of life, protection, and rebirth. She lit incense, its fragrant smoke purifying the air and carrying her intentions to the heavens. Then the incantations began. Her voice, at first a low murmur, steadily grew in power, reciting the great litany of resurrection spells so ancient and powerful they were known only to her. She called upon the divine forces of the universe, pleading and commanding them to release the soul of her husband from their hold. ANUBIS stood watch, his head bowed, his own voice a low, steady chant that reinforced the protective barrier around the ritual, turning the tent into an impenetrable sanctuary. The ritual continued through the long hours of the night. The very air grew thick with magical energy, a tangible pressure that vibrated in time with Isis's chanting. She recounted every good deed of Osiris's life, his justice as a king, his kindness as a god, his love as a husband. She lamented his murder, her cries of grief a potent weapon against the finality of death. As the night reached its deepest point, Isis enacted the most powerful part of the rite. She invoked her own divine nature, and a great transformation came over her. Her form shifted, her arms elongating into vast wings, her skin covering with dark feathers. She became a great kite, a sacred bird of prey, whose shrill cries were known to echo the lamentations of mourners. With a powerful beat of her new wings, she rose into the air inside the tent, circling above the mummified body of her husband. She flew over him again and again, her wings creating a magical wind, a breath of life that washed over the inert form. The sound filled the tent, a steady, powerful whoosh, whoosh, whoosh that was the heartbeat of the ritual itself. She was fanning the embers of his life force, coaxing his spirit back with the air from her own divine wings. She lowered herself until she hovered just above his face. Leaning down, she pressed her beak to his linen-wrapped lips and breathed. She exhaled her own magic, her own life force, directly into his body, a desperate, powerful attempt to call him home. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint light flickered behind the bandaged eyes of the mummy. A tremor ran through the body. The spirit of Osiris, drawn by the irresistible power of his wife's magic and love, had returned. He was briefly, miraculously alive. In that sacred, stolen moment, Isis lay with her resurrected husband. From this supernatural union, a child was conceived, an heir, Horus, who would be born to challenge the usurper Set and reclaim the throne of the living world. The miracle, however, was temporary. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, it became clear that Osiris was profoundly and irrevocably changed. Death had marked him. He could not remain in the world of the living. His restored body was a vessel for the afterlife, not a home for his return to his former life. He had been the first to die in such a way, and now he would be the first to be reborn into a new realm. He rose from his bier, no longer the king of the green, fertile lands of Egypt, but as the silent, majestic, and eternal ruler of the Jewett, the Egyptian underworld. His skin now bore the green and black colors of resurrection and the fertile soil, gaze held the wisdom of one who had passed beyond the veil and returned. He would now be the great judge of the dead, the being to whom all mortal souls would eventually answer. Anubis understood. His father could not stay. The work they had done was not to reverse death, but to create a new path through it. Before he departed, Osiris turned to Anubis. He looked at the solemn, watchful god who was his son and his savior. He thanked him for the gift of preservation, for the loyalty and skill that had snatched his body from oblivion. And in that moment, he officially bestowed upon Anubis his sacred duties. He appointed Anubis as the guardian of all who would follow him into the duat. Anubis would be the master of embalming, overseeing every funerary rite for gods and mortals alike. He would be the guide of souls, the opener of the ways, who would lead the dead safely through the perilous paths of the underworld. He would be the protector of tombs, the vigilant guardian who would stand watch over the necropolis for all eternity. Anubis accepted, his destiny now fully realized. Osiris gave his son and his wife a final, knowing look, then turned and descended into the duat to take his place upon his new throne. Anubis stepped out of the sacred tent and took up his post, his eternal vigil over the dead having now begun. Set's hatred was a fire that could not be quenched. The news that Osiris had been reassembled and resurrected, even as a king in the distant realm of the duat, was not a defeat for the god of chaos. It was an intolerable insult. The work of Isis, Nephthys, and Anubis had defied his decree of oblivion. The physical body of Osiris, the first mummy, still existed in the world of the living, a potent symbol of his failure and a potential conduit for even greater magic. So long as the body remained, Set's victory was incomplete. His malice, now curdled with a fresh layer of fury, demanded one final act of desecration. The mummified body of the once great king lay in state within the sacred tent, the Waybit, awaiting the final, elaborate burial rites that would secure his tomb. A vigil was kept, but the primary guardian was Anubis himself. This was his first official duty as the newly appointed lord of the necropolis, the protector of the dead. He stood as a silent, black-clad sentinel, his senses attuned to the subtle energies of the boundary he now commanded. His watch was absolute, his focus unwavering. Set knew a direct assault was impossible. The sacred ground was warded by the combined magic of Isis and the new, formidable presence of Anubis. He needed stealth, power, and a form that could slip through the shadows undetected. Calling upon his own dark powers of transformation, Set began to change. His form twisted and warped, his limbs elongating, his skin sprouting a coat of thick, golden fur. He became a leopard, the most cunning and savage of Egypt's predators. The leopard was a creature of the night, a silent hunter whose spotted coat allowed it to become one with the dappled moonlight and shadows of the reeds. It was the perfect disguise for an assassin, moving with a fluid grace that belied his violent nature. The leopard Set crept toward the sacred enclosure. He made no sound, his paws leaving faint impressions in the soft earth. He slipped past the mortal guards, who saw only a passing night creature, if they saw anything at all. Inside the tent, Anubis stood perfectly still. His training and his very nature had prepared him for this. He felt the disturbance before he saw or heard it. It was a subtle tear in the fabric of the sacred silence, a discordant note of chaos intruding upon the sanctity of his domain. Then came the scent, faint at first, but undeniable. The acrid smell of the desert storm, the signature of Set, clinging to the animal musk of the approaching predator. Anubis's head, the sharp-muzzled head of a jackal, turned slowly toward the tent's entrance. His eyes, accustomed to the deepest darkness, saw the shadow detach itself from the other shadows. Set in his leopard form, burst into the tent. He wasted no time on threats or pronouncements. His only goal was the linen-wrapped figure on the bier. With a guttural snarl that was part feline and part divine fury, he lunged, his claws extended, aiming to rip the mummy of Osiris to shreds. But Anubis was faster. He moved like a striking serpent, a blur of black that intercepted the leopard in midair. The two gods collided with a force that shook the very poles of the tent. A savage battle erupted in the confined space. Set fought with the raw, brutal strength of a cornered beast, all claws and fangs and muscle. He twisted and slashed, aiming to disembowel his nephew, to tear him away from the body he was protecting. The sounds of the struggle were terrifying, the snarls of the leopard, the sharp barks of the jackal god, the crash of ceremonial tables, and the tearing of linen. Anubis met Set's chaos with disciplined, focused power. He dodged and deflected Set's furious attacks, his movements precise and deadly. If Set could desecrate the first and most sacred mummy, then no soul would ever be safe. The cold, quiet rage that Anubis had inherited from the shadows of his birth now rose within him. This was a personal violation of his father, his mother, and his own divine charge. With a surge of strength, Anubis caught the leopard by the throat, his powerful jaws clamping down, choking off the beast's snarls. He slammed Set's powerful body to the ground, pinning the struggling predator beneath him. Set thrashed wildly, but Anubis's grip was like iron. For a moment, the jackal god loomed over his uncle, his dark eyes burning with a fury that was colder and more terrible than Set's hot-blooded rage. Punishment was required. A lesson had to be taught, one that would be seared into the memory of the gods for all time. Anubis dragged the pinned leopard toward one of the ritual braziers, where hot irons were kept ready for sealing resins. He seized one of the long iron rods, its tip glowing a malevolent orange in the dim light. Ignoring Set's desperate struggles, Anubis pressed the searing hot brand against the leopard's beautiful golden fur. A horrific scream, inhuman and divine, tore from Set's throat as the iron burned into his flesh. Anubis did not stop. Again and again, he branded Set's body, marking the pristine hide with a pattern of black, circular scars. He burned the marks of chaos and defeat onto the very skin of his enemy. According to the myth, It was this act that gave all leopards their spots. The branding, however, was not the end of Anubis's vengeance. The desecration had to be answered with a permanent warning. While Set was still weakened and reeling in agony, Anubis took a flaying knife, a tool of the embalmer, and with cold precision, he skinned the leopard. He stripped the spotted hide from Set's body, leaving the god of chaos raw and defeated. Anubis then stood up, the bloody, still warm pelt in his hands. He swung it around his own shoulders, wearing his enemy's skin as a gruesome cloak. It was a declaration of his power and a terrifying warning to any who would dare disturb the sacred rest of the dead. From that day forward, the leopard skin became a symbol of Anubis's victory and his authority. The high priests who served the dead, the sempriests, would wear leopard skins over their shoulders when performing the most sacred funerary rites, such as the opening of the mouth ceremony. By wearing the skin, they were embodying the power of Anubis, signaling their role as the protectors of the deceased and the victors over the forces of chaos and decay. His rage still burning, Anubis took his final revenge. Cloaked in the dripping pelt of his uncle, he left the sacred tent and traveled to Set's hidden camp. He moved with the silence of the night, a spirit of vengeance. There, he fell upon Set's followers, the 72 conspirators who had aided in Osiris's murder. In one version of the myth, with a single, supernatural slash of his blade, he decapitated the entire army, their blood staining the ground of the 18th nome of Egypt a deep, permanent red. The forces of chaos were annihilated. Anubis had not just protected a body. He had purged the land of a great evil, securing his place as the fierce and unyielding guardian of the dead. After his brutal and decisive victory over Set, Anubis fully established himself as the lord of the necropolis. His domain was the vast and silent cities of the dead that sprawled along the western bank of the Nile, the place where the sun set and the journey into the afterlife began. These were the sacred lands, the Kerneter, a sprawling landscape of tombs, mastabas, temples, and pyramids that housed the preserved bodies of generations of Egyptians. Anubis walked these boundaries, a silent, watchful god whose presence forever defined the line between the world of the living and the eternal realm of the dead. His authority was absolute. Before his ascendance, wild jackals had been a source of terror for the grieving. They were scavengers that haunted the edges of cemeteries, drawn by the scent of death, their sharp claws digging into the shallow graves of the poor to desecrate the bodies within. The Egyptians' greatest fear was that the physical body would be destroyed, severing the soul's connection to the world and preventing its passage to the afterlife. With Anubis as the supreme guardian, this dynamic was inverted. He was the jackal god, and the wild jackals became his servants. The packs that once prowled the desert margins with hungry eyes now became a legion of protectors. They patrolled the necropolis as his deputies, their natural ferocity turned from desecration to defense. A jackal's howl in the night was no longer a sound of dread, but a signal that the lord of the sacred land and his minions were on watch. Anubis's presence brought a profound sense of peace and security to the burial grounds. His primary role was the protection of graves, a duty reflected in his many titles. He was called Kentiamentiu, foremost of the Westerners, signifying his lordship over the dead who were buried in the West. He was also known as TPY letter 1E0FWF, he who is upon his mountain, a title that evoked the powerful image of him sitting watch from the high desert cliffs that overlooked the Valley of the Kings, his keen eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of intruders. As NBT 3 letter 1E0FSR, Lord of the Sacred Land, his dominion over the desert necropolis was complete and unquestioned. To ensure this protection, his image became a powerful ward, a ubiquitous symbol of his eternal vigil. His likeness was carved in relief on the stone walls of tombs and painted in vivid colors on the lids of sarcophagi. He was often depicted as a man with the sleek, black head of a jackal, or as a full jackal lying recumbent in a watchful pose, his ears alert and his gaze intense. A striking statue of Anubis in his full jackal form was discovered in the tomb of Tutankhamun, resting atop a shrine, a divine sentinel guarding the pharaoh's burial chamber. Families commissioned smaller statues of the jackal-headed god and placed them at the entrances to their family tombs, believing his image alone could repel evil spirits and mortal thieves. Prayers to Anubis were carved into the very lintels of tombs, a direct appeal for his protection. The threat of grave robbing was a constant anxiety in ancient Egypt. Tombs were filled with precious goods intended to serve the deceased in the afterlife, making them tempting targets for thieves. Anubis became the divine deterrent against such desecration. Priests invoked his name in powerful curses etched into the walls of tombs, promising terrible and swift retribution for anyone who dared to disturb the rest of the dead. These curses warned that Anubis would hunt down the transgressors, that he would turn their own bodies over to the devourer Ammit, or that he would ensure their spirits wandered the earth forever, denied entry into the afterlife. The fear of Anubis's wrath was often a more effective deterrent than any physical lock or hidden chamber. The worship of Anubis spread throughout all of Egypt, but his cult was particularly strong in certain locations. The city of Hardai, known to the Greeks as Sinopolis, or the City of the Dog, was a major cult center dedicated to him. Here, priests served him exclusively, and vast cemeteries have been discovered containing the carefully mummified bodies of thousands of dogs and jackals, buried with honor as a tribute to their divine master. Another significant center of his worship was Asiut in Upper Egypt, which also maintained a strong connection to his funerary duties. His temples were not always grand, opulent structures like those dedicated to the sun god Ra or the state god Amun. Instead, Anubis's true temples were the tombs themselves. His domain was the sacred land where the dead dwelt, and his worship was deeply woven into the fabric of funerary practice. families would come to the edge of the necropolis to pray to him, leaving offerings and asking him to watch over their recently departed loved ones. They trusted him to guide their family members safely through the underworld and to stand guard over their eternal resting places. Anubis's role became deeply personal for every Egyptian. He was the god who was present at the most painful and intimate moments of life, the moment of death, and the preparations that followed. Even after Osiris eventually rose in prominence to become the primary ruler of the underworld, Anubis's importance was never diminished. He simply transitioned into the role of Osiris's most trusted and essential lieutenant, the one who prepared the souls for judgment and then presented them before the great god's throne. He was the son who had saved his father, now serving him for eternity. Anubis, having solidified his dominion over the necropolis, now presided over all the sacred rituals that bridged the worlds of the living and the dead. The art of mummification was his sacred rite, and he supervised every step through his earthly representatives. The process began the moment of death. The family would transport the body of the deceased to the Waybit, the pure place, which was the embalmer's workshop, a consecrated tent or building always situated on the edge of the desert necropolis in Anubis's territory. Here, the chief embalmer, a high-ranking priest known as the controller of mysteries, Huriseshta, would take charge. To perform his holy work, he would don a lifelike mask of a jackal, thereby ritually embodying Anubis himself. When the family looked upon the priest, they saw their god, a direct assurance that Anubis was personally overseeing the preservation of their loved one. For the duration of the embalming, the priest was Anubis, his hands guided by divine will, his actions a perfect reenactment of the first mummification. Through these sacred ceremonies, Anubis fulfilled his promise to his father, transforming the horror of death into a structured, protected, and dignified passage to eternity. Once the final sacred rituals were complete and the tomb was sealed, the soul of the deceased, known as the Ba, was thrust into a new and terrifying reality. Its journey through the afterlife began, a perilous trek through a shadowy realm known as the Jewet. This was the Egyptian underworld, a complex and dangerous landscape that was not a final destination, but a path of trials that every soul had to navigate to reach the eternal paradise of the Field of Reeds. The Jewet was a world of profound darkness, a confusing and hostile place structured like the night sky, divided into 12 sections, each representing 1 hour of the night. Bizarre demons, with forms twisted into nightmarish combinations of animals and humans, guarded the massive stone gateways that separated each of the 12 hours. These guardians had terrifying names like He Who Lives on Snakes and Blood Drinker from the Slaughterhouse. Lost souls, those who died without proper burial or who became disoriented in the darkness, wandered aimlessly, their cries echoing in the gloom. It was a realm designed to test, to purify, and to destroy the unworthy. This is where the role of Anubis shifted from the embalmer and protector of the physical body to the essential guide and guardian of the disembodied soul. For his protection, the deceased were buried with a copy of the Book of the Dead, a collection of funerary texts containing the spells, passwords, and maps needed to navigate the duet. These texts provided the deceased with the right words to say to appease the demonic gatekeepers, and the knowledge to overcome the deadly obstacles. But a map and a book of spells were often not enough for a soul newly wrenched from the world of the living, terrified and alone in the overwhelming darkness. They needed a guide. Immediately upon the soul's entry into the duet, Anubis would appear. He was the first divine being the deceased would encounter after death. He was the psychopomp, the conductor of souls, and his most important title in this role was Wepwat, or another god sometimes identified with him, which means opener of the ways. He knew every secret path, every hidden danger, and every password needed to move through the underworld. Anubis would take the trembling soul by the hand and lead it personally through the perilous landscape. When they approached a gate guarded by a knife-wielding demon, it was Anubis who would speak first, his voice carrying an authority that even the most fearsome monsters respected. He would instruct the soul on the correct spell to recite from their Book of the Dead, and his presence ensured the gate would open. He would lead them around the lakes of fire and navigate them past the great serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos, who constantly sought to devour the souls of the dead and plunge the cosmos into eternal darkness. The soul was never alone in its journey. Anubis walked beside them, a silent and powerful protector, fending off the lesser malevolent spirits that preyed on the weak and confused. He protected the soul from the greatest threat in the duet before the final judgment, the demon Ammit, the devourer of the dead. Ammit was a terrifying composite creature with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a leopard, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, a combination of the most feared animals in Egypt. She lurked near the Hall of Judgment, eager to devour the hearts of those whose sins weighed them down. Anubis's vigilant guidance ensured that the soul would not fall prey to Ammit or any other demon before it had a fair chance to be judged by Osiris. Every soul that successfully completed the harrowing 12-hour journey through the duet did so because Anubis walked beside them. His presence transformed a terrifying ordeal of potential annihilation into a structured and survivable pilgrimage. He was the unwavering constant in the chaos of the underworld, the reassuring presence in the profound darkness. His sacred duty, appointed by his father Osiris, was to ensure that every soul who had lived a worthy life would have a safe and protected passage to the Hall of Truth, where their final fate would be decided. This was the great judgment hall of the underworld, a vast and silent chamber where the ultimate fate of every soul was decided. Here, at the very center of the duet, stood the golden scales of judgment, and upon a grand throne sat the majestic figure of Osiris, the king of the dead, waiting to preside over the final verdict. This was the culmination of everything the life lived, the mummification, and the perilous journey. And at the heart of this final, solemn ceremony stood Anubis, his role shifting from guide to the impartial and meticulous master of the scales. Anubis, his expression calm and unreadable, would lead the soul of the deceased into the great hall. 42 divine assessors, the judges of Mad, sat in rows, ready to witness the proceedings. Before the weighing could begin, the soul had to make a formal declaration of its purity. Standing before the assembled gods, the deceased would recite the negative confession, a list of 42 sins they had not committed during their lifetime. This was not a plea for mercy, but a declaration of innocence, a formal statement that their life had been lived in accordance with Mad, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. I have not committed sin, the soul would begin, and continue through the list. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not killed men and women. I have not been an eavesdropper. I have not been angry without just cause. I have not acted with deceit. Once the confession was complete, the final and most critical part of the judgment began. Anubis would gently guide the soul toward the great golden scales. As the guardian of the scales, this was his most solemn duty. With the utmost precision, he would take the heart of the deceased, which had been carefully left in the body during mummification for this very purpose, and place it on one of the golden pans of the scale. The heart, or ib, was the vessel that contained the entirety of a person's life, their thoughts, their intentions, their emotions, their deeds, and their character. It was the record of their moral and ethical life, and it could not lie. On the other pan of the scale, Anubis would place the single, pure white feather of Mad. This feather represented truth, justice, harmony, and righteousness. The weighing of the heart was a direct comparison of the soul's life against the ultimate standard of cosmic truth. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying honesty. Nearby stood Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, holding his scribal palette and a reed pen, ready to record the result of the weighing. At the foot of the scales, another figure waited with hungry patience, the demon Ammit, the devourer of the dead. Her monstrous form was a terrifying reminder of the stakes of this judgment. She was the final consequence for a life lived in opposition to Mad. With the heart on one side and the feather on the other, the hall fell into a profound silence. All eyes were on Anubis. He, who had guided the soul with such care, now had to ensure a completely fair and accurate judgment. He would watch the balanced beam of the scales, his gaze steady and unwavering, making sure there was no trickery, no interference, and no miscalculation. He was often depicted kneeling beside the scales, his hand held out to steady the plumb bob, ensuring the measurement was perfect. Anubis was the arbiter, the final check before a soul's eternal fate was decided. If the soul had lived a life in accordance with Mad, their heart would be light, unburdened by the weight of sin and deceit. The scales would balance perfectly, the pan holding the heart, rising to meet the pan holding the feather. In this case, Thoth would record the favorable verdict, and Osiris would pronounce the sole true of voice, Makeru. The deceased had passed the test. Their soul was then granted entry into the field of Reed's Aru, the Egyptian paradise, a blissful, eternal version of the Nile Valley, where they would live forever in peace and plenty. However, if the person's heart was heavy with the sins and misdeeds of their life, it would weigh down the scale. The pan holding the heart would sink, heavier than the feather of truth. This was the moment of utter doom. Anubis was not alone in his sacred duties, as his own family formed the core of this protective and guiding force. His responsibilities were shared and mirrored by a goddess, who was his exact female counterpart, Anput. She was his wife, a deity who was also depicted with the head of a jackal, or as a full jackal, often with a more slender and feminine form. Anput was the yin to his yang, the other half of his divine essence. She was particularly associated with the 17th nome of Upper Egypt, and together they represented the complete, balanced nature of funerary protection. Their union was not one of passionate tales or dramatic myths, but of a quiet, shared purpose, the eternal care of the dead. From their union, a daughter was born, Kebechit, whose name means cooling water. She was the goddess of purification and freshness, and her role was a direct and essential complement to her father's work. While Anubis was responsible for the physical preservation of the body through desiccation and wrapping, Kebechit was responsible for the spiritual purification of the soul. She was believed to bring sacred, cool water to the souls of the dead while they awaited their final judgment in the Hall of Truth. This act was one of compassion, a divine refreshment for the weary spirits who had just completed the harrowing journey through the Jewet. Kebechit also assisted her father during the mummification process itself. Priests would call upon her to purify the body with sacred water, and it was believed that she helped to keep the body fresh and clean during the long 70-day embalming ritual. Together, Anubis and Kebechit formed a father-daughter team that addressed both the physical and spiritual needs of the dead, ensuring that the body was preserved and the soul was purified. Beyond his own wife and daughter, Anubis had another crucial familial bond, his relationship with his half-brother, Horus. Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris, while Anubis was the quiet, dutiful son who protected his father in death. Horus was the active, avenging son who fought for his father's legacy in the world of the living. Their roles were distinct, but perfectly complementary. Anubis's domain was the necropolis and the underworld, and Horus's domain was the world of the living. The two half-brothers worked in concert to combat the chaos unleashed by Set. Thousands of years passed. The sands of time buried cities and temples, but the figure of Anubis remained a constant and unwavering presence in the spiritual life of Egypt. Dynasties rose and fell. Pharaohs came and went. and the popularity of certain gods waxed and waned with the political tides. Yet, through all these changes, Anubis endured. This enduring importance is written in stone and papyrus across 3 millennia of Egyptian history, from the earliest mastaba tombs of the Old Kingdom to the rock-cut tombs of the New Kingdom and the elaborate burials of the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. The image of Anubis is a constant presence. His black jackal form is carved into countless sarcophagi, painted on the walls of innumerable tombs, and drawn with reverent detail on funerary papyri like the Book of the Dead. Every mummified body for thousands of years was a testament to his handiwork, created by priests who donned his mask and followed the sacred methods he had invented. Every soul that successfully navigated the treacherous paths of the Jewett did so under his watchful eye. For millennia, priests continued to wear the jackal mask of Anubis during funerary rites, a tradition that connected them directly back to the mythical first embalming. They continued to wear the leopard skin he had stripped from Set, a symbol of their power to protect the dead from the forces of chaos and destruction. His cult centers in Sinopolis and Asiut thrived for centuries, drawing pilgrims and ensuring that his rituals were preserved and practiced with meticulous care. Millions of prayers were recited in his name, invoking his protection for beloved family members. He was the god to whom every Egyptian, from the pharaoh to the common farmer, would have to entrust their eternal fate. This brings us to the conclusion of the story of Anubis, the son born of a forbidden union, a child of shadow and fear, abandoned in the wilderness to escape a wrathful uncle, the one who created the sacred art of mummification, a gift of permanence in the face of oblivion, the fierce protector, a divine warrior who faced down the god of chaos himself and emerged victorious, the steadfast guide through the terrifying darkness of the underworld, the black jackal. Thank you so much for joining me on this long journey through the sands of time. I truly appreciate you spending this part of your evening with me, exploring the profound and timeless myth of Anubis. Creating these stories is a passion, and sharing them with you is an honor. I would genuinely love to hear from you, so please take a moment to comment below and tell us where you are listening from. You could also tell me what corners of mythology you want to explore next. Are you interested in the epic battles of the Norse gods, the intricate tales of the Japanese kami, or perhaps another deep dive into the Egyptian pantheon? With tour suggestions, we can explore together. If this story provided you with a moment of peace or wonder, I would be so grateful if you would hit the like button. And if you'd like to join us for more stories like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the myths of old. And now, I wish you a peaceful and restful night. May your dreams be quiet and your rest be deep. I hope to see you in the next video.